My name is Lisa Servan, and I am Dean of Milano, the New School for Management and Urban Policy, and also the New School for General Studies here at the New School. And I want to thank you all for coming to what promises to be a really provocative and enlightening discussion. I'd like to start by thanking the underwriters of this program, the Milano Foundation and the Cyrus Fund, and also a few friends that we have in the audience with us this morning. First of all, Steve Nislik, who's a member of our Board of Governors. I just saw Steve, but I don't see him at this very moment. This is the second morning this week that Steve and I have spent together. He was here a couple days ago helping us put on a really interesting program about the horse and carriage trade in New York City. And I'd also like to thank Sarah Rosen of J.P. Morgan Private Bank, which has an important role in funding the work of the Center for New York City Affairs and Milano. The Center for New York City Affairs at Milano organized this event as part of its larger mission to promote policy innovations that strengthen neighborhoods and reduce poverty. The center specializes on issues of public education, child and family services, immigrants, urban politics, and strategies for building stronger communities. How many of you are coming to a Center for New York City Affairs event for the first time? Wow, terrific. Welcome. We think you'll probably be back, judging from what we've seen before. At Milano, we work very hard to bridge the gap between academic theory and practice. We involve our students in hands-on policy work from their very first semester here, which is one of the things that distinguishes us from our competitors. And we have a few alums here this morning who I saw when I was coming in. Our students work with organizations and agencies working to create change both locally and internationally. And they leave here with an extremely firm footing in the professional world of policy and management, as well as a profound understanding of the forces that are shaping and changing our world. One of the ways that Milano ties together theory and practice is through the public policy forums put together by the Center for New York City Affairs. As you'll see that from this morning's event, these forums bring together local leaders and innovators to create meaningful dialogue about the pressing policy issues confronting low-income families in New York City today. And one of the things that I think is so great about these events is that you not only get an incredible mix of expertise and perspectives from the panel, but what we usually find when we open up the floor to questions is that there's an incredible mix right here in the audience too, and that the dialogue becomes even more rich when you all begin to participate. So a Milano education, which intentionally integrates policy and management, theory and practice, prepares our alumni to be especially effective in the urban policy arena. At Milano, we teach the skills that lie at the intersection of policy and implementation and the skills that managers need to improve their organizations and better serve communities in need. Today's topic is close to my heart. In fact, the issue of connecting low-income people to financial services has been at the center of my work for about 20 years. Cathie Mahon was an intern at Working Capital, a Boston-based microenterprise program in 1994 when I showed up there as a doctoral student to do my dissertation research. And Leslie Parrish and I wrote a piece on financial literacy in 2004 when we were both at the New America Foundation. So I want to welcome both of them and the rest of the panelists this morning. As we will hear about today from the Mayor's Office of Financial Empowerment and from our other panelists, there are currently enormous inequalities in the availability and understanding of mainstream banking practices, not only in New York City, but nationally. The New York Times ran an article just a few weeks ago about the Van Ness neighborhood in the Bronx, where the last bank in the area closed almost a decade ago. And the Pew Charitable Trust did a study in 2008 that found in many neighborhoods, check cashing operations far outnumber bank branches. This past summer, I worked with a team of Milano students with OFE to study one of New York City's many innovative public initiatives in this area, one of the financial empowerment centers, the first one, which is located in the South Bronx. And one of the things we found is that New York City is really an innovator in this area. In December, the FDIC issued a study finding that 7 out of every 20 New York households either do not have a bank account or rely on alternative and sometimes predatory services like payday lenders and pawn shops. And other research has shown that even when people do have a bank account, it's not a straight line from being unbanked to banked, that people are still using these services because the mainstream financial services sector is not serving their needs or creating the kinds of products that they're looking for. So we see the effects of this particularly and disproportionately in low-income and minority communities, and there is a racial aspect to this problem. while just over 3% of white households in the United States don't have a checking or savings account. The same is true for nearly 22% of black households. Today, we're going to look a little more deeply at these issues, at why this is such a critical problem and what's at stake for underserved communities. We'll also address what concrete steps can be taken to lessen this disparity. It's my pleasure now to introduce Jonathan Mintz, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs, who's going to present some new data on the unbanked in New York. Mr. Mintz was appointed Commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs by Mayor Bloomberg in March 2006. And since 2002, Commissioner Mintz founded and is co-chair of the Cities for Financial Empowerment, a coalition of municipal governments nationwide committed to aggressively and creatively leveraging local opportunities, resources, and powers to improve the financial health of their residents. Please join me in welcoming him.
I really want to thank the New School for Social Research and the Center for New York City Affairs for hosting this and giving us this opportunity to get very specific about the problems and also, true, I think, to the Bloomberg administration, to the solutions as well. The Department of Consumer Affairs in general works to ensure that the marketplace is fair, that businesses know what it is we expect of them, to keep that marketplace fair, and that consumers have the opportunity, based on good quality and price, to make smart choices with sufficient and transparent information. 3 years ago, when the Mayor's Commission on Economic Opportunity published their recommendations for how we should be thinking creatively and aggressively about fighting poverty, they talked about the role that the financial services sector plays for consumers, not only in terms of the opportunities that that sector offers, but also, speaking frankly, the roadblocks which can stand in the way if you take a look at high-cost loans, if you take a look at complicated or detrimental products. DCA's Office of Financial Empowerment was launched then 3 years ago and charged with using our opportunity and, as was mentioned in my introduction, frankly, our power to figure out how we could add unique and significant value to this question of helping people move forward in their family's finances. One of the critical building blocks towards financial empowerment is having an account at a bank or a credit union. I suspect I'm preaching to the choir. Are you not hearing me? I'm so sorry. Is this better? I'm sorry. Should I start over? No, I'm just kidding. Bloomberg Administration, good. Just a quick summary. Me, smart and charming. Okay, now we move forward. That's, if you missed that part. All right. That wasn't a joke. One of the critical building blocks is clearly having a mainstream banking account relationship, either with a bank or a credit union. A bank account makes it easier to save. I'm sorry, I want to make sure I'm on the right slide. Here we are. Yes, I think there we are. I got it. Okay. Caitlin, am I right? Thank you. A bank account makes it easy. You know these things. A bank account means that you get every dollar of your paycheck. A bank account means that you have an opportunity to save money. A bank account helps prevent you from theft, from friends and family as well. It makes sure that you can be smarter about the way that you spend the money that you've worked so hard to earn. It helps you pay your bills in a more reliable way. And it makes it more likely that you're going to be able to qualify for more competitive loans moving into the future. Until now, though, we've never really had a truly reliable estimate of the number of New Yorkers who were unbanked, meaning that they have no checking or savings account. We released a study 2 years ago, which those of you who haven't seen, I urge you to go onto our website and take a look at, the Neighborhood Financial Services Study, where we looked very intensively at two neighborhoods, Melrose in the Bronx and Jamaica in Queens, not just at the supply side of the equation, where are the brick and mortar institutions, but I think more illustratively at the demand side. What is it that people need? What is it that people are using? And trying to quantify and understand that significant mismatch. In those communities, what we found was that nearly 1 in 3 adults reported that they did not, in fact, have a bank account. If you go on our website at nyc.gov/consumers, you can take a look at the study. If you don't have a whole lot of time, you can look at the executive summary. And if you're really busy, you should just take my word for it. To see the distribution of banking patterns, however, throughout the whole city, we really needed some help. And so what we did was we worked with Social Compact, which is, for those of you who don't know, a leading nonprofit research organization, and Axiom, a financial service market group, to study private data sets. And when I say worked with, I mean we hired them. We looked at things like credit records and financial transactions. We looked at marketing surveys and other government data to get a much closer, more accurate estimate of who in New York was unbanked, and to dig deeper to figure out who they actually were. So we have a big problem here. And I think this is the right slide now. We have a big problem. What we found is truly disheartening. The data shows that New Yorkers are considerably more likely than people in the rest of the country to go without a bank account. In 13% of the New York City households, no one in the house has a bank account. But hang on to your hats, the news gets worse. This translates to an estimated 400,000 households, or about 825,000 adults. That's a lot of people without a bank account. In fact, it's more than the population of Miami and Pittsburgh combined, to give you some sense of the challenge. In the Bronx alone, there are nearly 269,000 adults who live in a household where there is no bank account. That is 28% of the adult population in that borough. This, of course, also represents huge losses of income to some of the New York City neighborhoods that are struggling most. The sheer volume of people who are relying upon non-bank financial services to meet their bill payment, check cashing, savings, and lending needs represents, by the way, an enormous market. It's a huge opportunity for banks and credit unions, and we're going to talk in a few minutes about how we're trying to leverage that side of this awkward equation. Unbanked New Yorkers are concentrated in select parts of the city, so digging even deeper. As you can see from the map, the unbanked households are primarily concentrated in three neighborhoods, in the three general areas, in the South Bronx, in northeastern Brooklyn, and then in northern Manhattan. 10 of the 59 community districts in New York represent half of the unbanked households in all 5 boroughs. So this is truly concentrated, and I think about 20 of those 59 districts represents over 3/4 of them. Across these communities, 41% of adults have no checking or savings account. It's a massive number. If you dig even deeper, the highest percentage of unbanked residents are in the neighborhoods of Melrose and Mott Haven in the Bronx, and in those neighborhoods, 59% of households have no bank account with a bank or a credit union. When you compare neighborhoods, Inwood, Washington Heights has the greatest single number of people lacking bank accounts, about 76,000 unbanked households there. So what do we know demographically about these ultra-unbanked communities? Well, residents of these highly unbanked communities tend to be predominantly African American or Hispanic. They tend to have lower levels of education, and they are considerably less likely to own their home than the average New Yorker. The median income in these particular communities is only $30,000 a year. To put that in perspective, that's about 2/3 of the city's median income. This is where it continues to get, I think, really interesting. Proximity to a bank or to a credit union is, to say the least, and surprisingly, no guarantee that residents will, in fact, open up one of those accounts. Across the city, as you can see, let's start here, there are roughly 1.5 banks and credit unions for every check casher or non-bank lender. When you look at it citywide, the ratio of fringe services isn't overwhelming. If you look at every borough except the Bronx, there are, in fact, more banks and credit unions than alternative financial services providers. But in the highly unbanked communities, the opposite is true. Check cashers and non-bank lenders outnumber banks and credit unions 2-to-1. Now, one takeaway is clear, and that is that additional investments into these communities could help or could be part of the solution to connecting people to mainstream financial institutions. And we've done a lot of work together with the state to try to make that happen. We've worked for 6 years now to increase the number of households with bank accounts by using city dollars to make large deposits, and state dollars as well, to make large deposits into banks and credit banks that open new branches in particularly unbanked neighborhoods throughout the state, and in particular in the city, thanks to the state's Banking Development District program. In his State of the City address a few weeks ago, Mayor Bloomberg pledged to also invest $25 million of the city's municipal deposits into credit unions if Albany will change the law to let us. I was in Albany a couple of days ago. We'll see. I mean, I'm confident that we will have that law changed and be able to make good on that opportunity. I do want to make clear, however, that this data shows us something even more, I think, significant, which is that opening a financial institution in an underserved neighborhood is really not a cure-all. This table shows that the average distance to a bank or credit union from the middle of each block group in the community. That's how it shows. And on average, New Yorkers live about 0.3 of a mile from a bank or a credit union. In the highly unbanked communities, residents live about 0.4 of a mile from a bank or a credit union. But in some unbanked neighborhoods, in all 4 of the community districts in Upper Manhattan, for example, and even in Melrose, which has that highest concentration of unbanked households in the city, residents actually live closer to banks or credit unions than on average throughout the city. That's, I think, a game-changing fact. Now, while we realize that this doesn't take into account public transportation and the fact that people move around the city and can take use of services, not necessarily just where they live, it does confirm what we found in our 2008 Neighborhood Financial Services study that I mentioned earlier. Living close to a bank or living close to a credit union is not the solution to whether or not you're going to open a bank account. What does get people to bank accounts? That's what's, of course, most important to us. And our answer, our sense of the data, our focus groups, and everything we're learning tells us that it is about the products and services that are actually being offered by those institutions. So that's where we come in. Under Mayor Bloomberg's leadership, the Department of Consumer Affairs has opened our Office of Financial Empowerment. We are working together with businesses to bring the right information, no problem, but also the right products into the marketplace. So first and most simply, what we did was we reached out to the hundreds of community organizations that were offering financial education services. We pulled them together into something we call the Financial Education Network, and we used the power and promise of 311 to make it as simple as possible to connect the public to what was already out there. So you can call 311 and you can say, I need this kind of a class in Russian, what do you have? And our operators can actually tell you what is available out there and do that quite quickly. We even have a terrific search engine on our website where you can do it yourself. So the first thing we did was broaden access to what was already out there. The 311 operators have helped connect over 35,000 individuals to these services alone. In addition, we have found that by creating this network, we have done more than increase access. We have created a community. To our surprise, this was not actually a community of providers. It was a series of providers doing their own thing. And I think that pulling this network together has had some unintended and lovely consequences. Second, we have launched what is now a network of almost 20 financial empowerment centers across the city. I'm a great believer in financial education. We've invested a lot of resources in thinking about it, but particularly when things get complicated, a website ain't going to do it. Neither is a brochure, neither is a terrific class. At the end of the day, when things really get complicated, what people with lower and middle incomes need is what we all need, which is to sit down with an individual who is a professional that can help triage the problem, help map out what the solution is going to be, and really work with you one-on-one to make you capable of getting in control. And that's what we've done through these financial empowerment centers. We piloted at our first in June of '08, and unfortunately we were in the right place at a terrible time. And so quickly scaled up these one-on-one counseling services of professional counselors across the city in English and Spanish. So these counselors are doing everything that you would hope that they do. They're doing the fitness checkups, they're getting on the phone and helping negotiate debt, they're dealing with inaccurate credit reports, they're connecting people to protective services when debt collectors are doing the wrong thing, they're making sure that people are getting all of their benefits, etc. Third, and this is, I think, one of the more graphic examples of where government offers genuine and significant added value, we are using our power to protect people in the services marketplace. Just as a few examples, the Department of Consumer Affairs alone regulates some relevant industries. We regulate debt collectors. We write and enforce the regulations that talk about how often people can call, how early, how late can you call the employer, what can you and can you not say when you're on that phone call. And we hold debt collectors accountable for the way that they collect on debts to New Yorkers, and unfortunately more often inappropriately collect on debts that were never owed or were paid off long ago. In addition, as another example, we regulate, we do enforcement around tax preparers during tax time. Without scooping an upcoming announcement, we go out every year and our inspectors check. Are tax preparers accurately explaining what a refund anticipation loan is, or are they deceiving people into thinking that they're just getting a quick refund? Another example, we have called for the City Council to give us the authority to regulate an industry that is not yet locally regulated anywhere in the country, the rent-to-own industry, a place of last resort with some real problems that I'm sure many of you are aware of. We do a lot of other things with our regulatory powers and with our voice. We advocate around preemption issues. We have been very aggressive in Washington, and while I can't claim personal success for us, I think we've had some wonderful successes recently around issues in the credit card industry and on overdraft. I've been to Washington several times as members of our staff, helping the Treasury Department and the legislature think through the role that the proposed Consumer Financial Protection Agency can play. I've told them that we're a bit of a canary in the coal mine and would love to and have been offering a lot of our experience there. Finally, we have developed a suite of innovative financial products and services that financial institutions have voluntarily partnered with the city to offer in order to really address, as what I said earlier, was the root cause that people weren't banked, which was it didn't feel safe to go get a bank account. Today we are beginning our public outreach on the account that the mayor mentioned in his State of the City address, the New York City Safe Start account. Now, the goal of this account is, in fact, to go right to the population of unbanked in the city to address the primary reason that they are unbanked. This account is essentially an ATM card. It has an extremely low minimum balance. Among the 10 institutions thus far that are offering it, the balance ranges from $0 to as much as $25. There is an override of the check system. Many of you know, but the public doesn't always, the sort of secret blacklist in the financial services industry. There are no monthly fees, and most importantly, most critically, there is no overdraft. Now, the mayor announced the NYC Safe Start account in his address in January, and again, I want to emphasize that while we're all hopeful for additional regulations in Washington in the coming years, what's really thrilling is that we were able to broker these voluntary relationships with these 10 institutions, 5 banks and 5 credit unions. We are delighted that our partners are now able to offer this account across the city. Anybody can have one of these accounts, whether you are re-entering the banking system, whether you are just getting started in the banking system. This is an excellent and genuinely safe opportunity to do so. To find out where to get an account, you can go to a financial empowerment center, you can go to many bank branches. We keep it simple. All you have to do is call 311. Another product that we've been really proud to offer some of you have heard of is our Save NYC account, another account that we brokered with institutions. This is a savings and asset building initiative that we have piloted in tax season. We're trying to take that moment that people are finding out that they're getting a tax refund, the average earned income tax refund, some $2,700, and urging people to split part of that refund off before they even get it into a safe CD-like product that, again, a number of institutions have agreed to offer for the city. And we have used private dollars that we've raised to match those savings. If they leave it in there for a year, 50 cents on the dollar. That's a great savings rate. What's much more exciting is how successful it's been thus far. Taking a look at last year, the average saver earned only $17,000. So one of the things that we love about what we're learning here is not just how many people we're helping, of course, but we're learning that it is nonsense to think that those with lower incomes in an unbelievably expensive city in a terrible economy can't or won't save. They can and they will. It's a question of making it easy for them to do so, and that's why we're so excited about the Save NYC opportunity. The other thing, of course, that we're excited about in the way that we designed it is that the Save NYC program, by working through the tax returns, was designed to be scaled nationwide. So we have spent a good deal of time in Washington sharing our research and trying to reallocate or find the public dollars to offer this across the country. I'm also particularly excited, it was mentioned earlier, our coalition. This movement is spreading. I think as we think about using the role of city government, using our position, using our power in this field, which has traditionally been left to the nonprofit organizations, the movement is spreading. We've created and co-chair a coalition called the Cities for Financial Empowerment. We only invite in cities that, as I say, have pulled some triggers rather than shown up at press conferences. These cities are really pioneering very innovative approaches to asset building and access to financial services, et cetera. There are hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers who are unbanked in this city. And we see it as our mandate, our challenge to change that terrible fact. And so to do so, we will continue to crack down on predatory lenders, on deceptive financial services practices, and we will continue to make as many safe opportunities as possible, and only safe opportunities, for people to re-enter or to first enter the financial services marketplace. We will continue our work to connect people to these safe, affordable banking opportunities that will allow them to build a stable base for their family to grow. I'm going to get out of the way now. I appreciate all of your time. The panel can chew over this information and we can get a little bit more specific. Again, I want to thank the New School and the Center for this opportunity. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Commissioner Mintz. I'm Andrew White. I direct the Center for New York City Affairs here at Milano and the New School. Thank you all for turning out on this somewhat dismal day. I just want to tell you quickly a little bit about the center and then tell you how this is going to move from here to the end of the program. The Center for New York City Affairs is an applied research center that's dedicated to improving the effectiveness of government in its work with urban families and communities. We support urban innovation through research, policy analysis, public dialogue, strategic planning, and events like this one. I think we heard some very interesting possible innovations some very interesting innovations that have possibilities to reach quite a few people. One of the questions on the table today is to what degree can these be scaled to reach a significant number of the unbanked in New York and even the nation. First off, I just want to thank our team and the staff and students who put this together, especially Alec Hamilton and Karen Mirowitz and Anna Schneider, who got this group here and invited all of you. And it's a wonderful thing when students and the staff of the center can work together to pull together something like this. We have a lot of students working with us who have a great deal of passion and skill, and it's evident in most of our work. Before I introduce the moderator, I want to say that during the second hour, there's going to be time for audience participation. The way we do it is we'll have a couple of people with mics. When our moderator says we want questions, just put up your hand and somebody will come around and check in with you, and we want to try and map the flow of the questions so that it fits with the discussion. I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator, who is Dean Starkman. He is the editor of The Audit, which is a blog at Columbia Journalism Review's website that covers the financial press, essentially, the business press. Prior to working at CJR, he was a fellow, a Katrina fellow at the Open Society Institute, covering what was happening in New Orleans following the hurricane. He spent 8 years as a staff reporter at the Wall Street Journal, covering white-collar crime and real estate and the securities industry. And he's worked at the Washington Post and the Providence Journal as well, where he helped lead a team that won the Pulitzer. So, Dean.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks. I'm delighted to be here and to represent CJR and to work with the new school on this very vexing problem, sort of a chronic issue that I'd like to sort of explore the roots of. I was walking to the subway on Willoughby Street in Brooklyn and passed 3 check cashing stores in a block. So we see that there's no shortage of there's obviously a market for these outfits, and the question is sort of what to do about it. It strikes me that this problematic relationship between the financial services industry and the low-income and minority communities is obviously a long-standing one, and it seems to have 2 sides to it. The main critique, it strikes me, is sort of reviewing this issue over the last few years as a press critic, has always been that either the financial services industry is not paying attention to these groups, or when they do, it's the wrong kind. And so the question, I guess, for us today is how to sort of find a sweet spot and see if there are solutions to that long term. Another question I'd sort of like to throw out to the panel is making the connection between these groups and mainstream banking actually the solution or the last word on this question, because it seems to me that we've got 2 categories we've sort of spoken about this morning. One is the unbanked, the second is the underbanked, and there's a third category I'd say we'd call the badly banked. And many of us also feel like we belong in that category too, so I'd like to sort of see if we can make the distinction. So what is is it a degree, or is a difference in kind between the low income and minority groups that are facing with the financial services industry and the rest of us? So with that, I'd like to actually get the panel up here. So we actually are very lucky today. We have a really terrific group, a strong group of experts. We've got, yeah, find your sign. Deyanira Del Rio is Associate Director of the Neighborhood Economic Development Advocacy Project, NEDAP, which is a well-known group that does really first-rate research into the troubled relationship that we're talking about. Ed Kramer is Executive Vice President of Regulatory Programs at Wolters Kluwer Financial Services, which is a Dutch-based financial services provider, and he also spent many years as a Deputy Superintendent of Banks for in the Consumer Services Division of the New York State Banking Department, and has had a long history of interacting with regulators, consumers, and the banking industry. And Ed is most certainly not here to represent the banking industry or advocate on their behalf, but I'm glad to have him here because he can sort of help us explore some of these issues since he lives in the banking space and can help us understand some of the problems and the barriers to profitability that seem to be difficult for the private banking sector to overcome in low income and minority neighborhoods. Cathie Mahon, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Executive Director of the New York City's Office of Financial Empowerment. And this is an interesting agency that's launching some very interesting public sector solutions or ideas in this area, and they seem to be very new, very innovative, and something we need to kind of get deeper into. And upside down. Yes. Okay, it's Leslie Parrish. She's with the Center for Responsible Lending, and really, not to put her upside down, that is actually an amazing organization based in Durham, right? For those of you not familiar with it, this, and Leslie will tell you more about it, I hope, but this group was so early and so right on the mortgage crisis and the subprime lending problem way back before anybody recognized it as a problem at all. This is, I'm talking about before the turn of the 21st century. Their research was so on point, so thorough, so prescient that you know, had, and as a journalist, I safely say that had the press paid more attention, simply read their reports, we might not be facing the situation we are today. So we're really, again, we're really lucky to have this particular panel. So the way I'd like this to go is I'm going to try, I think the best thing for us to do is to sort of define the issue, explain exactly why the discrete problem of access to banks and mainstream banking is a problem and so acute. I'd like to sort of see if we can come upon some discrete solutions to that narrow problem, and then I'd like to also step back a little bit and look at sort of the backdrop, like what are the structural, economic, and sort of social problems that we're looking at that leads to such incredible statistics that we just heard, that 20% of the people don't have a bank account in certain communities, and sometimes more. So obviously, you know, I think we all agree that this is a terribly important issue, and we also probably agree that if everyone had a bank account, we probably wouldn't have necessarily solved all the problems. So with that, I think I'm going to start with Day, if you wouldn't mind, talking about what are the implications of the figures we heard this morning. Why is it important that 20% of, well, 60 million Americans apparently don't have a bank account or are underserved by banks, and what are the implications of that?
Okay, is this working? Okay. Good morning. Thanks for having me as a representative of NEDAP on the panel. I think Commissioner Mintz did a pretty good job of outlining what are the sort of the broad implications for individuals in terms of not having access to affordable bank accounts, in terms of ability to save money. You know, you can't open an account or have a safe place to save at a check cash or any of these other institutions that have proliferated in neighborhoods where you don't have banking access. Also, the cost for people to just conduct basic financial transactions, cashing their own paychecks, you know, getting access to small amounts of credit at fair prices for emergencies or other needs, being able to avoid some of those very expensive and often abusive services that proliferate and target people who don't have access to an affordable bank account. You know, it's not like if you don't have banking access, you don't have bills to pay, checks to cash, and so forth, other credit needs. So who you're going to meet those needs is, you know, you're much more likely to be paying usurious rates for loans and losing huge sums of your salary to just getting access to your own wages. But one thing I did want to add was maybe this would be a good time to flash a couple of our NEDAP maps.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. So you saw a few maps of the city in terms of bank branch access, and you also heard that having a bank branch in your community isn't the solution necessarily, because there are plenty of banks that, you know, have opened up in low-income neighborhoods and aren't necessarily advertising their services, reaching out to low-income people in the community, and so they're sort of sitting there sometimes empty, or they're serving only the local businesses or maybe the more affluent community members. That said, we do think that physical branch access is sort of an interesting and important thing to look at. So if we could
We're working on
flash
it.
one of the first maps. This is going to work.
We fixed
So,
it the last time, so we'll fix it this time.
For those that don't know NEDAP, we're a resource center for local groups, and we support efforts. We bring groups together to promote economic justice in low-income neighborhoods and communities of color, and to fight discriminatory lending practices and other exploitative financial services. And we've been doing this work since about 1995. We've been mapping and documenting different types of financial services and loans that are available in communities for a very long time, and I'm trying to stall. When you see this map, it's going to be a map that shows...
It has orange and red.
Is it not working?
And it's
it shows the
fine-looking map.
distribution of bank branches in New York City as a whole will be the first map, and it sort of controls for the population, and what it shows are neighborhoods that have fewer than one bank branch per 10,000 residents in a community, and then there are other neighborhoods that have tons of bank branches per 10,000 residents.
Right. In fact, since we can't get that, I'll be happy
It's
to
not
describe
working.
it. I mean, no, it's amazing. Below 110th Street in Manhattan, it's red, where there's 3 or more bank branches per 100,000 residents. In that's also large swaths of Staten Island have bank branches, and
you know what? I think I can. Let me jump in. I think I can maybe. We'll see if we can get this going.
Please do. This is really quite a remarkable slide. In fact.
We also
Sorry.
zoomed in on a couple of neighborhoods, so you could see, like, on the ground what it looks like and where you have a bank branch versus a pawn shop versus a check casher, in sort of physical distance. But let me just throw out a few numbers, and you can get a sense for New York City. We just updated some numbers to show bank branches in different neighborhoods. In East New York, you have one bank branch serving every 17,000 residents in that community. You have in the South Bronx one branch for every 11,000 residents. Central Brooklyn, one bank branch for 13,000 residents. And just to give you a comparison, for Manhattan as a whole, there's one bank branch for every 2,000 residents. So, it's not the solution only to have a bank branch in your community, but when you don't have a branch and instead you have check cashers and pawn shops. I think the South Bronx is like the highest concentration of pawn shops in the country. And that's where people are going to basically get access to short-term loans, bringing jewelry or some item and pawning it to meet emergency needs. Then I think the implications for individuals is really clear. People are losing thousands of dollars of their already low wages for these services. And then when you look at it from a neighborhood perspective, which maybe we'll get to do later, there's tens of millions of dollars that are drained from New York City's low-income neighborhoods and communities of color every year to pay for these services. We do a lot of work around tax refund loans, which is an issue right now during tax season when the tax preparation stores, as you heard from Commissioner Mintz, offer these, sometimes they call them rapid refunds. They're actually usurious loans that are made by national banks, like, some national banks, that don't have branches in the community, and they're making these usurious loans, and you have earned income tax credits and people's hard-won, wages, their refunds, going to pay bank fees, basically, for these loans that can cost anywhere from 70 to 700% interest rate. So, just to make sure we're clear, this is money that's being siphoned out of neighborhoods and New York City's economy, and not just individuals' pockets.
Great. And I was wondering if we can sort of sharpen this a little bit and put it in dollar terms, both in the aggregate, and if anybody could talk about the difference between what a poor person might pay with a non-banked person might pay as opposed to somebody who has a bank. So, Ed, you seem to be ready to go.
Let me, and I'd like to go back to the issue of the branches that are relatively scarce in communities where there's only 10 or 12 or 15,000 people served by one bank branch. So I'll come back to that. And NEDAP has been an incredible proponent and advocate Yeah, well, maybe it's not on because I am. It's on?
Yeah, he
Okay.
says a little closer, yeah.
I'll try to
Yes, I've
put it
learned
like
that.
a rock singer, you know. Right
Exactly.
close. Anyway, I was deputy superintendent of banks from the year 2000 till late in, well, then I think I have a.
Why don't you try this one? Yeah.
We'll try this. Is this better? Great, okay. I was deputy superintendent of banks for the state of New York from 2000 to late in 2006. My division was the Consumer Services Division, which handled applications for banking development district designation. That was a law that was passed in the late 1990s. The first banking development district opened in Spring Valley. I believe it was in the year 2000 because I remember being up there cutting the ribbon with then State Comptroller Carl McCall, who carried an oversized reproduction of a $50 million check that he deposited into that bank branch. $10 million, as the law allows, at below market rates. So any of us that can remember back in the year 2000, maybe you could get 7% then on a savings account, where you get 0.5% now. So the state law allowed that to be to earn 1% less. 1% on $10 million is a lot of money. The $40 million was market rate. The bank had to pay the state a fair market rate. The county put $3.5 million in, and the city of Spring Valley put $1 million. Bam! On day one, that branch had almost $55 million in deposits. Since that time, 37 additional banking development designations have been made by the state of New York. My former division was the division that processed those applications and made the recommendation to the superintendent for approval. And 25 of them are in New York. I believe 5 are in the Bronx, 8 are in Brooklyn, 7 are in Manhattan, 3 are in the 7 that are in Manhattan are mostly in the upper part of Manhattan, Harlem, and other areas, or in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which a couple of years ago, believe it or not, was an unbanked area, but now has seen some revitalization.
Ed, if I could jump in, that is definitely going to be one of the part of the solutions category. But right now, the question before on the floor is
let me get to your question.
What's it costing people?
A person goes to a check casher, chooses to use a check casher, and even in a highly regulated state like New York, where check casher fees are in fact regulated, and I'm not sure, I've been away from the regulatory environment, but let's say it's 2%. I remember when it used to be 1.4, 1.5%. So if I get a $300 paycheck and I walk into a check casher and I pay 2%, that's $6. $6 to cash one check. I then take that money and I need a money order because I need to pay Con Ed or I need to pay some other bill. I now pay for the money orders because I'm not entitled to anything free as an unbanked customer. So the cost could be, or I use a prepaid, preloaded debit card that maybe costs me $10 a month because I want to have a card, a piece of plastic that has a Visa logo on it or a MasterCard. So when you add up all those components, this unbanked customer is paying $10, $15, $20, $30, $40 a month just in fees to conduct banking-like transactions. This is an enormous burden on those earning among the lower wages in our city. Now, has anyone ever heard of a basic banking account? Anyone know what that is? Well, a couple of you, maybe 3 people raised their hands. There is such a thing as a basic banking account. It's required by every bank in the state of New York to offer a stripped-down basic banking account. It's in the law. You could walk into a bank today and you could say, I want to open a checking account. Now, they're first going to tell you all about the checking accounts that have $10 monthly fees, et cetera, but at some point in that conversation, that bank has an obligation to tell you that they can offer you a basic banking account. They can call it, you know, any kind of fancy name they want, and that account can be opened with a minimum deposit of no more than $25. that account can then go down to 1 penny on that same day or the next day. That account can't cost you more than $3 a month. And I think, if I remember correctly, you're allowed 8 transactions a month at no cost. So you could have 4 checks, 4 ATM transactions, et cetera. So one would say, well, wait a second. If I can open a basic banking account for $3 a month, have my paycheck direct deposited into it, go and be able to cash checks for free, be able to write checks, be able to use an ATM, why wouldn't I do it? I don't know if you want to get into that part of the conversation.
Well,
now, but that would give you kind of a cost.
Understood. And even given that, we have this, we do have these, you know, these well-intended laws that and programs that are out there, and yet we learn that there are 23,000 payday lending stores in the country. It's more than McDonald's and Starbucks put together.
Well, and there are some reasons for that,
right,
Dean. Some people choose not to go to a bank. Some people don't have the forms of identification. You know, as a result of 9/11, we had the Patriot Act, which requires photo IDs, multiple forms of it, copies of Con Ed bills, copies of telephone bills showing your right address. There's also some cultural issues with fear of going into a bank and giving all this disclosure of information, Social Security numbers, et cetera. There's the issue of alien versus non-alien status, resident status. So there's a number of reasons why some people, there's also some of the blame is on the part of the banks that may not have created a hospitable environment for people to come into, whereas you go into a check casher, it's convenient, it's local, it's a corner little store, it's fast, it's easy, it doesn't require a lot of information, disclosure of information.
Does anyone have any figures on what it's costing people?
So I have some for the New York area, and I'm sure Leslie has some great ones on the national level. Can people hear me in this microphone? Okay, if I'm that close. So in a 2008 study that the commissioner referenced earlier that we did at the Office of Financial Empowerment, we did a neighborhood financial services study, and we were able to pull from banking department data an estimate of about $225 million in fees each year that New Yorkers, New York City residents, are paying in check cashing fees.
Right.
And then I'm sure Leslie will expand on it, but the Brookings Institute had done a study a couple years ago that looked at a low-wage worker over time, over a lifetime of paying an average amount of check cashing fees. And they found that a low-wage worker could be spending as much as $40,000 over their lifetime in check cashing fees. So imagine what that money could have been doing had it been going and diverted into a savings account. And then there's a couple points that I just wanted to touch on that Ed had raised around you know, why people are not banking, and I know we'll get into some more of that, but I do think from our neighborhood financial services study, the highest indication that people who we surveyed as to why they were not banking is because of fees, ironically. So we talk about all the check cashing fees that people are paying, and the reason they're not going into the banks is they're concerned about fees. And more importantly, when we probed what that meant, people were most concerned about the unpredictability of fees. So there's something about a check casher, you walk in, you see a sign, you know exactly what it's going to cost you, even though that may be costing you a considerable amount in the long run, you know what you're paying for. In the case of the banks, the biggest concern was this unpredictability of fees, the hidden fees, which really has been grounded in the problem with overdraft protection fees.
Interesting. So we got sort of 3 gradations of the problem. You've got the very expensive non-banking system. You've got the problematic areas of banks, and then the way it should be. Can you help define? Leslie, maybe help define sort of what the quantitative actual dollar difference what does that mean to people? What actually are how much more are people paying? What kind of impact does it have?
Yeah, and I can just dovetail on what Cathie was just talking about. I don't have the figures for nationally how much check cashing costs people each year, but in a lot of ways, people that are unbanked are making a very rational choice. For one thing, it's predictable. They know how much they're paying each month for a check casher. They can budget for that amount. And it may actually be cheaper in the long run for them to use a check casher, unfortunately, than to have a bank account and to become ensnared in kind of a cascading number of overdraft fees, which can easily rack up to hundreds of dollars in a single day or a single week. We've done a lot of research on overdraft fees, and what we found is for a lower income family, an underbanked family that's kind of maybe in and out of the banking system, they can pay anywhere from $500 to $1,500 a year just in overdraft fees. And that's an overwhelming source of total bank fee income. We've estimated that banks take in about $24 billion in fees every year just for overdraft fees. And that's more than Americans spend on books, cereal, or fresh vegetables every year.
Explain the overdraft a little bit more, because that's essentially kind of a very high-priced loan, isn't it?
It is. It's recognized as a form of credit, but unlike normal loans, you don't have to have any disclosures, such as an APR disclosure that's showing you, how expensive this loan really is. And basically what an overdraft, there's two types of overdraft protection. There's a formal type where you're getting a transfer from a line of credit or your savings account. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fee-based overdraft, where basically any transaction you do at a bank, it could be through your debit card, withdrawing money from an ATM, or through a traditional check. If you don't have enough in your account to cover it, the bank will cover it for you, in essence giving you a loan, and charge you a fixed fee. And right now the fee is generally around $34 per transaction. But most people are overdrawing not through a $900, well, in the city a lot more, a $900 rent check is usually the example I use. But they're usually overdrawing their account through small debit card transactions. So the poster child for this is going into a coffee shop, swiping your debit card, and then overdrawing your account, and your cup of coffee has now cost you $40.
So Day actually brings to mind your map, which I'm afraid no one's seen, but
they said it's working now.
Oh, fantastic. I'd love to, can you put it up? Whatever's on the computer? All right, well, trust me here. Imagine the map of New York, the 5 boroughs, and you're looking, seriously, and you're looking at the Bronx, and the white spots are where there aren't very many banks, branches, and the red spots are where there are a lot. And there's obviously huge, just trust me, huge swaths of territory, basically most of the Bronx, and Eastern, most of, looks like a big chunk of Queens and Brooklyn really don't have less than one branch per 10,000 people. So the question for Day, I guess, is that's a problem with the with not having the bank branches. But we've just heard that it charges $34 for an overdraft, and whatever the annual rate is for that help us. Here we are trying to bring these banks into these communities. Is this the way to go? And talk to us about this problem.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the key thing to keep in mind is if people have access to affordable bank accounts, which is a very big distinction. It's increasingly important distinction, because so many bank accounts, especially over the past few years, have just become with these courtesy overdraft, automated overdraft programs that are really designed to trigger fees. They're designed to entrap people into getting hundreds of dollars of fees at the end of the month. These can be financial landmines for low-income people who can't maintain a nice cushion in their bank accounts. Right. So I think that products like that, those kinds of services, have made it really complicated for community groups and advocates and others to say that, unilaterally that a bank branch is a better option for people. I think that, hopefully we'll get into this, there needs to be a lot of reform, and we're starting to see some of that happen, of the banking system, before we can steer low-income people and others, comfortably encourage them to go to banks.
Okay, I'll get to it in just a second. Yeah, but that's a very, this is an essential problem. So what, I'm actually going to go back to you, Day. Right now, let's just say we don't have the appropriate reforms in place. And so it looks like people are kind of stuck between, the rock and a hard place, bad non-banking or bad banking. And Ed, I'm going to get to you because I see you have a view on this, but what should you do right now?
Well, one other alternative, so there's the bad banking. There's also some other institutions that are alternatives to the check cashers as well as the banks, which are credit unions.
Right.
So credit unions are not-for-profit financial institutions. There are community development credit unions that are specifically formed by people in order to serve underserved communities, low-income immigrants and other underserved populations. And in New York City, we're fortunate to have a lot of them, and several of them are in the room. Can you raise your hands if you're at a community development credit union? Affiliated with one, yes? So there's a Brooklyn Cooperative Federal Credit Union. There's Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union. I serve on that board. There's Neighborhood Trust. There's almost in every borough and in numerous neighborhoods throughout the city, these not-for-profit institutions that are good, sound alternatives to the big banks. And, you know, hopefully we can get into them a little bit more.
I'd like to, Cathie, you had something to add there.
Just on this point, I mean, this is just to emphasize what the commissioner had mentioned. The city has worked with 10 financial institutions, 5 credit unions, and 5 banks to create a safe, what we call Safe Start account. And it's a safe and affordable account that cannot be overdrawn. And we have pulled these institutions together. They have worked you know, incredibly well with us in sort of making a consistent product across these different institutions. And there's more than 40 branches around the city that are currently offering it. It's available also through our financial empowerment centers. But I think I just wanted to sort of emphasize that, you know, I think when we think about approaching the question of helping unbanked people get connected to the financial mainstream, a couple things are important. Number one, how they get connected really matters because it's going to affect whether or not they're sort of cycling in and out of the financial system. And so making these accounts available as broadly as possible, I think, is really critical. I think it's also important that when using the Banking Development District, making it more robust, including credit unions as part of the Banking Development District, which is a big push that the Bloomberg administration is doing right now, and enabling us to sort of really fortify getting the right institutions into these target neighborhoods.
Right. Okay, so that's an interesting problem. So for the sake of our discussion, I'm going to assume that it's a good thing to bring mainstream banking geographically into these neighborhoods.
If they have the right product.
Understood. Let's just assume that they do, even though we're afraid that they actually might not. It strikes me, and Ed, I want to ask you about this particularly. I mean, it seems to me, and I think I spent too long at the Wall Street Journal because it strikes me as that whereas education programs are great and these pilot and nascent public efforts are obviously promising. Strikes me that in the end, if there's a market solution, it's better because it works faster, just more of it. And it seems to me there's some sort of market failure going on here. You know, these aren't rich people, but there is money there. Other industries have managed to make a lot of money off of you know, operating in low-income areas. I think of the fast food industry. I don't want to compare the two or say that that's a great thing, but the fact is that mainstream industries have been able to offer, you know, low-cost products in these neighborhoods and make it work. What are the barriers to profitability for mainstream banking? And I'm kind of curious as to if you could even get into the nitty-gritty a little bit, because I assume that there's some kind of expected profit margin that a bank needs to justify opening some. You know, we all agree that banks want to make money at the minimum. So why don't they or can't they in this instance, in these neighborhoods, with these groups?
Let me answer that, but let me just go back to the bounce protection. In November, the Federal Reserve finally, in my opinion, it was long overdue, made revisions to Regulation E. And Regulation E, these revisions will go into effect on July 1st. And what that will do is that will provide some restrictions on the ability to charge a bounce protection fee, say of $35 on an ATM transaction or a debit card transaction. So if I go into Starbucks to buy a $2.50 coffee, and if I overdraw my account, I won't be able to be charged that $35 unless I've opted in. Now, some of you, as I have been getting, are now getting all these nice mailings from the bank saying, soon you're going to get an offer to continue this great product called bounce protection, by the way, which I opposed when I was deputy superintendent of banks, so I'll just put that out there, even though some of my bank clients may not be happy to hear that. But there will be some restrictions. So I will affirmatively have to sign a document that says I want bounce protection.
Fair enough, but for the moment, we're assuming that, it's good to have a bank branch in your neighborhood.
Okay, now
so why aren't they moving to Mott Haven and
a couple
East New York
months
and
ago,
Bed-Stuy?
I guess a year ago, the banking department held hearings on the Banking Development District program. 2 banks apparently submitted written testimony because I got it off the internet. One was Ridgewood Savings Bank, that said it currently has 2 branches that are qualified as enriched banking development districts. And it says, as of today, profitability for either of these branches is not on the visible horizon. Amalgamated Bank testified that it now has a total of 4 BDD branches, and it does not see profitability in the foreseeable future. We know that some of the banks, at least when I was there, would come back to us and say, we're struggling. Because if you take away the state deposits, which are only supposed to be there for 2 years, and you take away the city deposits, which get put in, I believe, for a year at a time, and you take them away, and you're only left with the retail deposits, you're highly unprofitable. So the state and the city have extended and renewed, in some cases, I think, as long as 6 years. But eventually, when that public money comes out so it could be recycled for other banking development district banks, the bank has a problem. And what is part of the problem? The problem is generating enough customers and enough deposits and enough services to be able to reach that level of profitability. Normally, profitability comes, and again, I haven't been a banker for 20 years, but normally profitability comes in 3 years. You open a branch, you expect to be profitable. Sometimes on the Upper East Side, you could be profitable in 18 months or even less. But if you go into a typical New York City community, your goal is to break even in 3 years. These banking development branches, absent the state and city deposits, are not reaching profitability in 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And it's a problem. And part of the problem is enough customers have not come to the bank. But remember, these are lower income people who don't put $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 deposits in. They put smaller deposits. And if they don't put it into the right account, then they end up paying all those fees. That's why I'm amazed when I asked how many people know of a thing called a basic banking account. 2 hands might have gone up. Why don't we all know about that? Why don't you all know about it? Why aren't we all doing more to encourage people to open that?
It strikes me that well, I mean, again, 2 separate issues. If the banks actually moved into the neighborhoods and then offered everyone, if they're not profitable now, they wouldn't make any money. They may be even worse off if they only offered basic banking. Leslie, I wanted to ask you, CRL is affiliated with a credit union, self-help credit union, which makes a living in this space. Help us understand why there aren't any credit unions. Where are the credit unions in the Bronx? Where are the credit unions in East New York?
Sure. So just for a little background, CRL is affiliated and grew out of one of the largest community development financial institutions in North Carolina, which is the Self-Help Credit Union, and we have a mission to serve the underserved, people that traditionally would not get banking services in low-wealth communities. And I think one of the larger issues is kind of the bank revenue model is really broken right now. The people that subsidize and generate the most income for banks are the people on the high end that can put in large deposits where the bank can earn interest, but increasingly the people on the very lowest end that are living paycheck to paycheck, that have very low balances, that are really just fee income generators. And so you have kind of a U-curve where the people on both ends are subsidizing the vast majority of account holders. Maybe 80 to 90% of account holders are completely subsidized and would not be profitable. So generally, unless you have a huge account balance, you're only profitable if you kind of do the wrong thing and generate a lot of penalty fees.
Right. Well, how do you guys do it?
Well, we do have some retail operations. We primarily provide loans. But I mean, one thing is, and credit unions can benefit from their nonprofit status. So they are tax exempt. So there are different margins involved with a credit union than with a bank. But I think the key is really upfront pricing, both from the bank's perspective. So if they do need to charge maybe a very modest monthly fee instead of offering what's called free checking, but doesn't end up being free at all.
Right.
I think there is a market for that, just as check cashers do very upfront pricing. I think what people really want is predictability and upfront, very transparent pricing more than they. So if
a University of Chicago economist was here, I guess I would ask him or her, like, all right, well, you've got very expensive services in these neighborhoods, and credit unions could come in and offer the same thing for a better price. Why aren't they?
Can I just answer that? In New York City, there are credit unions in these neighborhoods. So now the map's actually up. And what you're looking at are the lighter shaded areas of the map, or zip codes where, again, there's fewer than one bank branch per 10,000 people in the community. Those diagonal stripes that you're seeing on the map show neighborhoods that are predominantly Black or Latino. So one of the ways we look at this issue is not only as a low-income issue, as a consumer issue, but as a neighborhood development issue and as a racial justice issue, because that's the way it plays out in New York City. You look at areas like Southeast Queens; those are middle-income neighborhoods, but they're primarily Black, Caribbean, and so they also, although they're middle income, have the same lack of access as other neighborhoods throughout the city. So there's lots of ways to look at this issue that I think are really important. But some of the neighborhoods you see here, like Bedford-Stuyvesant and Bushwick, the South Bronx, serving the public housing in the Lower East Side, Washington Heights, East Harlem. These are all neighborhoods that don't have bank branches, where community residents have gone together and formed their own local cooperatives, their own local credit unions. There's a big campaign now that Huffington Post and others have picked up, this Move Your Money. For those people who don't want to be with their big banks, that don't want their money, their deposits going to make loans in other cities or towns, and this is an option for people that want to put their money in a place that's local, where they know the money will be reinvested in local loans to small businesses and nonprofit organizations. And just want to, point out that they are here as well as in other low-income and underserved areas throughout the country.
Fair enough.
And if I could just add to that, there is currently a somewhat archaic state law that prevents municipalities from placing their deposits in credit unions. That is the law that we mentioned we're looking to have changed. I do think that can also help to kind of fortify the credit unions to be able to have a larger deposit base from which they can serve more and more people in these neighborhoods.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes before we're going to open it up for questions, so start thinking about that. Ed, could you help us further understand how you can scale up, or for instance, Chase might have expectations for a branch that Amalgamated doesn't, and that self-help credit union might even have lower expectations for their branch. What is the barrier for a nonprofit cooperative credit union thriving, or at least making a living in neighborhoods that there's no competition, zero?
Well, I think one of the things that Cathie mentioned was the inability to take municipal deposits, which makes a credit union unable to be a part of the Banking Development District program. And I think the banking department and others are advocating that. But let me read you something. This is something I got off the web last week. It says, double your standards. And it starts by saying check cashing. That's the lead. Check cashing. Get your money quickly, no hassles, friendly staff, discounts for depositors, rebates from our check cashing savings club, money transfer, and bill payment. Doesn't sound like a bank, does it? That's a bank. This is a bank that opened in the Bronx, up by Yankee Stadium. Now, I've been away from it. I'm not a regulator. I don't have access to this information. I happened to go up to the Treasurer of the United States was here about a year and a half ago for some special program. I got invited because the bank, I think, is maybe a client of my company's. But here's a bank that got a new charter just a couple years ago, and simultaneously with the bank charter, it got approval to acquire a couple check cashing locations. And what it's trying to do, and that's the goal of this bank, is to take those folks who are check cashing customers and wean them over and incent them and encourage them to become banking customers. How successful they are or not, I'm not sure, but the concept, I remember when they submitted their application. But again, it's easy for us to sit here and say, well, it's irresponsible banking to charge a $35 bounce protection. Hey, my mom and dad would have told me when I was a little boy it was irresponsible to spend money I didn't have. And again, I'm not defending the banks, but there are issues here. And I, as a regulator, saw it, and I now, with my clients, see it. The bank says, I'm not charging them fees for doing something that they don't have control over. You know, I remember, and it's a big deal. I remember a lot of college students that we all give our kids a debit card tied to a checking account. They go off to school, and bam, bam, bam. Meanwhile, if we let that account overdraw, in one day they could rack up $100, $200 in fees. Right. Whose responsibility is that?
Did you want to respond? Because obviously there are obviously some transparency questions about the how those, you know, how much information the market has about those fees.
Yeah, I just want to address that. I forgot what your original question was, but now I just feel like I have to answer that.
We're trying to figure out why there's seems to be market opportunity for a lower, you know, right, a bank with a lower margin expectations in, again, an area where there absolutely is no one else there.
Right, right.
And I was going to say, on this sort of point, rather than scoffing at check cashing stores and these others, which seem to be, I don't want to say popular, but they obviously have a lot of customers, there may be some, and Ed was kind of pointing to this interesting example up by Yankee Stadium. So here's a bank trying to pretend it's a check cashing store. Mm-hmm. Why? Well, the question might be, answer might be, there is some transparency there. I think Leslie or Cathie mentioned that at least you know what you're paying. So I guess that's sort of the issues about you're about to address the overdraft question, but also, is there something that banks and even credit unions can learn from these low-income service providers?
Yeah, okay, so let me try to focus this a little bit. So just on the overdraft issue, I think one thing that's really important is that banks, you know, before, 5-10 years ago, they weren't offering this type of hidden overdraft service. This is something that, you know, this is part of the trend towards, you know, lenders suddenly putting the burden all on the borrower and saying, well, you need to basically manage your money better. We're going to, you know, hide the fees. We're going to give you a service you never asked for that just comes with your account. We're going to, you know, include in your account balance the amount of overdraft we'll allow you to take out so that it looks like you have it, and then when you trigger it, it's like, gotcha. Right. And I just feel like, you know, putting, you know, that's sort of, there's this, I think we need to just address that from a regulatory perspective, and it's starting to happen. But, you know, you can't put all the burden on an individual to be looking at the fine print and figuring out those hidden fees and so forth.
Well, obviously, right. If there's going to be a transaction, both parties ought to know the terms. I mean, that goes without saying.
And encouraging someone to overdraw.
Sure.
That fee is not hidden after the first time I get hit with $155 in fees this month. So now, now I'll modify my behavior. Next month I won't do it. No, it doesn't happen.
I mean, we do a lot of...
Next month it's 150 in fees, and the following month it's 150. So at some point, I agree. Mm-hmm. I don't think the industry has done a good job with how it handles this. I would have loved to have seen an opt-in, very clear disclosures. Now the Fed finally acted on that. We'll have that in July. But the bottom line is, I know what the fees are. It's like, why do people go to payday lenders? Why are people willing to spend 600 to 1,000% to borrow money? The bounce protection is just like a payday lender, but people do it month after month after month.
I guess this would be a good time to sort of do the backdrop to the whole banking problem. Question is, I don't think, let's just say people who go to payday lenders, I think it's fair to say that payday lending is pretty transparent business. You know what you're going to pay. You get $300 and you pay $350. Used to be like loan sharks used to say, five will get you four, whatever it was. So
We're very lucky that in New York State, payday lending essentially is illegal because of our usury cap of 25%. So in other states, you have the check cashers doing the payday lending out of the storefronts. We don't have that problem here. They're dying to get into New York, but hopefully we'll be able to keep them away.
Fair enough, but here goes the issue. We've got, and again, I'm not the payday lender defender industry here, but people, let's just assume that people make rational choices when they go up to these payday lenders, and it's like, I'm going to be paying, and I probably won't be able to pay this off. You're going to have to keep rolling it. It's going to turn into a 400% loan. Let's just give them credit for understanding that. Maybe they probably don't, but maybe many of them probably do, and yet they go. What are the, obviously there are larger issues that no one would choose to do that. No one wants to overdraw their checking account. People would prefer to save than run up their credit card, and yet we have this this chronic, I think, and growing problem. So I obviously we need to at least think about sort of the economic backdrop to this. What do we need to, how should we put this banking problem in context? Cathie, do you want to talk about that?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think, I think there's a couple of issues we're sort of bundling into the unbanked question. I think there's a fundamental money management question that I think Ed raised, that no doubt, regardless of the vehicle which people are using, whether it's a payday loan, whether it's a high interest credit card, there has been a proliferation of high cost consumer debt out there, and people are finding themselves in trouble. There's it's tied to the economy. But it was also growing. High cost consumer debt was growing during the sort of more boom times. Our network of financial empowerment centers, we have counselors who work with people on sort of getting back on their feet. And I would say about 70 to 80% of the people who come into our financial empowerment centers have debt as a defining issue. One of the sort of a component of the study that the commissioner was talking about earlier that he didn't talk about today because we just focused on the question of unbanked is sort of the incredibly high debt levels that people are carrying in these same neighborhoods. So you have neighborhoods that are completely, that have huge numbers, huge percentages of people who are unbanked, and yet they have 5 lines of credit cards, and are carrying high debt loads. So, so the question of sort of needing emergency cash and why people go to payday lenders, why people are racking up so much around their credit is a much more fundamental question about, just how people are managing in a high cost marketplace like the city of New York. We have, and part of it is that, just the cost of accessing services. If you're low income, everything's going to cost more, not just the banking services, but the credit that you're able to access will cost you more. So, I think that part of the solution, if we've gotten to the sort of solutions,
yeah, we're there.
Is marrying up these strategies of getting good, safe products out there, and marrying it up with good financial counseling, advice. A lot of what our counselors just do is work with people on negotiating down some of their debt levels and negotiating with creditors and trying to figure out how to at least reduce interest rates, if not reducing, some of the fees and charges that get loaded on to these balances, and then helping them come up with a game plan for getting rid of it. So, in the end, I think what we really need to be promoting is a sort of a holistic approach to this, to this problem of people being unbanked or underserved when it comes to the right types of products and services. And counseling definitely has a role, as well as the getting the better product availability. And I'll just say, I think part of better product availability on the credit and debt side is really trying to help people maybe consolidate some of this high cost debt that they are carrying into much more manageable, lower interest rate loans. So.
Good. Fair enough. I would throw in a couple of seems like salient stats that we need to seem to grapple with. You're talking about high debt levels. It's one of the anomalies of the economy of the last 10 years was we had reasonably strong GDP growth in the first part of the decade up until the crash, and And at the same time, we had declining saving rate to less than zero in 2006 and 2007. Those were again, those were when the economy was good. We also had credit card debts rising several fold to $1 trillion during the same period. This was before the crash. I guess there's seems like there'd be, when we wonder, Ed, when we wonder why people would repeatedly overdraw their checking account, it seems like we have to actually step back and think about some larger economic issues we're talking about. You need income to put money in a checking account.
See, I'm of the belief that people have become readily aware of what is happening and what the charges are, but many people are desperate and many people have need. It's borrowing. It's another form of debt. It's spending money one doesn't have. Part of what I wanted to get to is some of the solutions. I serve on the board of an organization called Operation Hope. Operation Hope has a program called Banking on Our Future. We have reached and touched hundreds of thousands of children in public schools. In New York, we're up to 20,000. We take people that we train, many of them bankers, many of them people from publishers like Time Magazine and others, and we bring them into city schools through a cooperative arrangement with the Department of Education in the city of New York. And we go in and we teach financial literacy. We try to do the very basics. I do this. I go in, I talk about that basic banking account. I talk about the difference between a debit card and a credit card. I talk about medical savings accounts. I discuss some of the basics, and I am always amazed. I've done it with adult ed programs. I am always amazed how receptive people are and how thirsty they are for the knowledge, because I don't think there is any formal curriculum in most schools anymore teaching youngsters financial literacy. And a lot of those kids go home and talk to their parents about it. So I put my time in when I can. I support my organization, but we need more of that going on. We need to really make sure that people have a sense of what all this amounts to.
Anybody else on the panel want to address that? Is financial literacy the problem or the solution?
Well, somewhat related to that, and also Cathie's comments, I think one of the kind of larger picture problems is we've asked low-wealth individuals, people living paycheck to paycheck, to solve their problems with high-cost credit. And that's really the only options that have been available. And I would argue more fundamentally, some of the approaches like the savings account that you all are offering are really going to be the long-term solution, so that people don't always have to turn to credit when there's the inevitable emergency or financial shortfall occurs, that they can draw down on their own savings accounts. And I would like to see more in that direction of helping facilitate savings. For a lot of low-income people, if you're trying to qualify for food stamps or temporary assistance, for a long time, we've discouraged the buildup of savings. We've said you've had to spend your savings down and you're not allowed to put away any money for a rainy day if you want to get assistance from these programs. And so there needs to be a lot of reform in that area to really encourage people and help them to put away some money.
Well, we've all been following the health insurance debate, and one of the things on the table, apparently not on the table anymore, was the public option. Is there a public option here that we should think about? Again, we have a obvious market failure. Why doesn't the post office offer a checking account, or why doesn't the government step in and just offer low-cost loans and break even?
Well, I'll speak about one possible public option around in the savings arena. Something that we're piloting here in New York City is this Save NYC account program, and we do it at tax time when people, when many low-income families are receiving the earned income tax credit. For many families, it's the single largest paycheck they get all year is their tax refund. And an average, people receiving the EITC in the city of New York, I think at an average of like about $2,500 of a return when they file their taxes each year. And so it's this sort of fundamental moment where people are getting money into their pockets. And what we're trying to do is encourage them to put aside some of that into a savings account, and we'll match them 50 cents on the dollar if they keep that money aside for at least a year. And the idea is really to get people into the habit of using these sort of moments when, a windfall moment when they're getting some money back to allocate a part of it into a savings account and start a pattern and practice and a habit of savings. And what we've been finding from year to year, we're now in our third year of the program, that we've had increasing numbers of individuals who are not just saving for a year and getting the match, but they're actually rolling those accounts over and continuing to keep it in savings. And it's starting to change the way people are thinking about their own current financial situation and their prospects for the future. And I'll just say the public option on the federal level is, that's something we would love to see incorporated into the tax code as part of sort of an added saver's bonus onto the earned income tax credit. It's a pivotal moment when low-income people who are getting money back anyway could really be incentivized to save, and it sort of starts people on this automated process of savings each year.
That sounds very promising. I'd like to follow up on that, but I'm going to say we have some time for questions if you have one, and I don't know how they're working it, but there's a microphone here. Raise your hand, and yeah, fair enough. And I guess that I'd like to explore that a little bit more, this potential for federal legislation to encourage savings, and how's that going? What's the prospects for that, and is that actually
Feasible.
Seriously under discussion?
So there's a couple of avenues. There is, likely to be a bill that will be introduced that for specifically sort of a standalone bill for this savers bonus. But I think there's also another vehicle where we might be able to see this happening, and that is there already exists a federal savers credit, which currently provides a credit for people who allocate a part of their income into retirement accounts. And the problem with the federal savers credit is it's not a refundable credit. So if you're a lower income family and you don't have a tax liability, you're actually not eligible for it. So it really ends up being something that's much more skewed towards middle and upper middle income families. So there's a couple of things. I think there's going to be a review. Expectations are once the health, following the sort of the healthcare discussions, that this sort of a next big initiative would be to look at the tax code. And one of the things would be to try to figure out a way to make that federal savings credit refundable, which would open it up for lower income families who receive the EITC and other credits. But also then we would love to sort of, as that conversation's happening, try to figure out how to get those usages expanded, because what we found from our research is very, very low-income families, when you ask them to save for retirement or like a home or something that seems far off and a distant goal, it's a lot harder for them to choose to pull the trigger and actually start down that pathway to savings. It's a lot easier to get them jumped into savings by saying, don't worry, within a certain period of time, you'll be able to access this, and then they're able to continue to roll it over. So we're hoping to use our data as those conversations start happening on Capitol Hill.
Interesting. I want to leave some time if there are any.
Hi.
Please go ahead. And we're looking for questions.
Okay.
And,
yes, now, wait.
And briefly,
Go
ahead, please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Deborah Brooks. I work with Youth Financial Empowerment, and it's a savings, hi Cathie, savings and asset building program for youth in care who happen to be a very indigent population in New York City. My question to you is, and I'm sure Cathie has heard me ask this, my question to you is, to the full panel, has anyone considered creating a full partnership with the DOE so that you can go in schools and do the thing that they did years ago, and not only do financial literacy, which we do, but also to start a bank account. So you can do this K through 12, and I don't care if they start with $2, but it'll be create the habit of savings. Is that on the table at all? Has anyone considered that? If not, please do. Thank you.
I can tell you it's too bad he left. There was a gentleman here from Capital One Bank who used to, Capital One, you know, used to be North Fork. And I don't know if North Fork still has it, but North Fork had a bank within a school, and the kids would perform the roles as the bankers. I don't know that the regulatory community has been very supportive of the efforts by banks to put schools in, but I agree with you. I think it's great. I think the more you can do to encourage, you know, banking activities, and I do know that Bushwick High School used to have a program called Bushwick Bucks. It was like Monopoly type money, and they actually they made loans to each other, they bought and sold things, and at the end, if you accumulated more of these Bushwick Bucks, you could redeem the dollars in the gift shop. And the gifts were, certain banks would do that because they get CRA credit. So there are programs out there. I just think there's not enough.
Yeah, I live in the D.C. area, and I know at least in Maryland and Virginia, there are some efforts underway to actually have small bank branches that are actually run by students in the case of high schools in the schools. And it makes for really interesting financial education because not only are you learning it, you're putting it into practice right then, which I think is a really critical step.
Great. Anybody else? There's a couple of hands up.
Hello. Hi. Steve Lee from Robin Hood Foundation. So let's make the assumption that banks are not making money off low-income clients. Let's assume that's true. What I fear is that banks are going to try to wring money from these same clients by corollary means, by promoting high-interest credit cards, by promoting unsecured loans, et cetera, which may put them in an even worse situation than if they never joined the bank in the first place. Mm-hmm. So is that a concern? If I'm a bank, that's what I'm doing. So why would they not do that?
That's a good question. Who would like to handle that?
I mean, I think
incentives
it's safe
all go
to say
in a certain direction. Yeah.
A lot of them are doing that actually, and you know, we do a lot of. One of the projects that NEDAP has is a consumer law project. We have a hotline and also clinics, community legal clinics, where we help individuals who are struggling with debt collection and other kinds of issues. And there is a lot of connection between the bank account access and real rational reasons why people avoid accounts and their credit and debt issues. So I just want to make sure that people understand that because it's really, you know, I don't know that it's commonly understood. We sort of divide banking access and having an account with your credit issue and debt issues. But one of the, you know, the number one issue that our hotline was flooded with when we opened our you know, lines, we started inviting people to call us years ago, were around debt collection issues where people, and this is on the rise now, where people are getting sued for debts, often that are not valid debts, they're too old, or they're not really their debts, they were, you know, for whatever reason, they don't actually owe them. But there's this new industry of debt buying companies and others that are filing, you know, hundreds of thousands of lawsuits every year in New York City, flooding the civil courts. People don't get any notice of these lawsuits. When they don't appear in court, the creditors or the debt buying companies get automatic judgments in their favor. They blast out the notices to all the banks and credit unions in the area, and those institutions for a long time were freezing people's accounts, and in many cases people were losing their wages. So those individuals who've had that happen to them have a very rational reason for avoiding bank accounts and staying away from them.
Right.
There's a new law in New York State that protects people from that lots of groups, including us, fought for. And so people are protected in that way. But there are a lot of these debt buying companies were owned by, you know, major banks, major national banks that now are in the debt collection and you know, that's fear and going after the same people that they've underserved in all these other ways.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem. The question was, you know, that the banks have an incentive to you know, do the wrong thing, I guess, in this context, and the customers also have real incentives to stay away from banks. So there's a disconnect. How about another question?
Hi, my name is Day Piercy. I'm with the organization called CreateNet Tools for Change. My question, I think it's for Day, not sure. In New York City, we only have 3 community development financial institutions, which is, serve specifically the low-income communities, are set up to do that. I don't think the banks are doing anything wrong. I think the banks are doing what's profitable.
Okay.
And it seems to me one of the big solutions here is socially responsible banking. And I'm wondering if you see more of a role for the community development financial institutions, which are banks, but that work in low-income communities and work in many ways similar to the ways that credit unions do. So sort of question, how much credit union, how much CDFIs?
Right, so just to clarify, so community development financial institutions can be either credit unions, community development banks, loan funds. There's lots of different types of institutions that can apply to the Federal Department of Treasury and become certified as community development financial institutions. You could also be one de facto without having the official designation. But what that means is your primary purpose is to promote community development, not just open your doors to become a profitable lender or whatever institution you are. And there are more than 3 actually CDFIs in the city. There's lots of them. There's micro enterprise lenders that make small loans to business startups. There's the credit unions, which are full service sort of financial cooperatives, banking cooperatives. And I do think that there's a moment right now when people are more aware of these issues than they ever were in the past because of what's happened over the past few years. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to get people, moved into these institutions. I just want to say that, one of the major issues that I work on at NEDAP is immigrants' access to fair and affordable financial services, and the CDFIs have really played a leading role in that. Ed had mentioned this as a barrier earlier. There's actually a lot of misinformation out there about what immigrants' rights are, and I feel like it's worth explicitly saying, since we're in New York City, which is 40% immigrant, and includes more than 700,000 undocumented immigrants, the size of major cities in the country. And there actually are the Patriot Act, which passed after 9/11, has a provision in it that requires financial institutions to know their customers' identities. It does not require them to have immigration papers. It does not require them to produce visas at a bank. And we routinely hear these stories when we're working with community groups, doing presentations. So when we're talking about why don't people use banks and why aren't they going to, why aren't they making this better decision? If you walk into a bank and the person asks for your ID, ask for a social security number, which is not needed. They can accept an array of other numbers, actually, from people. Ask to see the visa stamp in your passport to make sure you're here legally, which they're not required to do and really aren't trained to do. There's lots of, very concrete barriers that people run up against when they're going to open these accounts. So I just want to make clear that it actually isn't the case that you need to produce all of this sort of identification. The problem is that many banks are not doing this. And the CDFIs, I think, are taking the lead in serving this huge segment of New York City's population.
Interesting. There's a communication gap between the bank and the customer, and certainly on the ID question, and also basic banking doesn't seem to be filtering out between one party to the other. And again, it seems to be a disconnect. Who else would like to?
Hi, my name is Catherine Sokol, and I want to get back to the education question, because that's one that's near and dear to my heart, as I teach in a New York City public school, and my field is economic education and financial literacy. Interestingly, New Jersey, I understand, the state of New Jersey has instituted a new personal finance requirement for all students in New Jersey public schools. I think it's effective this coming fall. And I again want to return to why this is not the case in New York and what we can do about it. So I open that again, but I guess at the same time, just to make a plug, I have worked with an institution here, it's actually headquartered here in New York City, called the Council for Economic Education, which is involved in this issue, and they provide curriculum development and teacher training, and a lot of the teachers coming to get trained by us are from New Jersey because they've instituted this requirement. And ironically, we're right here in Midtown. It's actually a national organization. They're all over the country. But there are opportunities to train teachers because I think I do strongly believe that the issue is education. We can at least follow this. We might not be able to solve this problem this generation, but the easy way to do it for the next generation is to educate our students. So that's more of a statement than a question, but if you have any more to say.
Fair enough. Anyone? Thank you. Is there another question?
Over here.
Hi, my name is Joan Ferreira. I'm a financial counselor at Credit Where Credit is Due. So we work with many of these organizations being mentioned, with FEC, with NEDAP, we get a lot of help from your website. And it's been talked about, and I think one of the solutions, and mind you, I deal with this type of clients every single day with people that are unbanked. I feel that the solution for that is, and it was mentioned, is K-12 financial education. But more importantly, I had a story from a client that she told me, the only reason why I don't have a bank account and I have my prepaid Visa card is that if I don't have any money, I just can't buy the stuff and I don't get that overdraft fee. So, I've been thinking that one of the solutions that these financial institutions, banks, credit unions, or any model that wants to go work with a low-income, population would be, why can we provide a debit card that if you just don't have any money, you just don't buy what you need to buy, and you won't get charged that overdraft? Because I feel that everybody knows what an overdraft fee is. And the problem is not that they don't know the fees, it's the lack of information into how to relate to them. We solved one problem of the unbankable because with the Exempt Income Protection Act, because many people that were afraid of opening bank accounts because of the fact that they were afraid of these debt collectors that were garnishing either the wages or putting liens on their account. Now, if you have less than $1,700 on that account, you're kind of in a safe place. So that's resolved. But now is, how can we protect our low-income earners from these overdraft fees or from accounts that will charge them those fees to help, start saving money frequently and, again, educate them through K-12 financial education.
Right. So I guess another way of putting this question about why isn't there more basic banking? Isn't that more, I don't mean to
or the kinds of accounts that OFE is developing with institutions that don't allow for overdraft and are more predictable.
Right.
In their costs.
And did we answer how to get to more basic banking availability? How do we do that in a practical way and something beyond consumer education, which I think we all can agree on, but we all know that, but what else?
Let me throw out a provocative thought. Maybe our approach of trying to get more and more unbanked people to become banked is wrong. Maybe we ought to leave people choosing to use check cashers and money order providers, rather than get them to go over to become a bank customer and then get hit with $35 fees. If we're talking about someone who pays 2 checks get cashed a month, $6, say, an average, and then some money orders, maybe they spend $10, $12 a month. We encourage them to become a bank customer. We give them a basic banking account for only $3 a month, and then they start overdrawing their account. They get hit with $35. Maybe the way people are doing things is right. It's kind of like years ago we had this encouragement by Congress and various other federal agencies to make sure everyone was able to buy a home. The American dream was to buy a home. So we got millions of people that made predatory loans, got them into homes, and now they're all in foreclosure. Maybe some people should be renting, and some people should be owning. Maybe the same thing goes for banked and unbanked. Just a thought. I'm not advocating it either way, but based on the discussion we had, it seems to me that on one hand we're saying, well, we got to get them banked, and then we're bashing the banks and saying the banks are overcharging.
Anyone? That's a great provocative point. Who wants to pick up on it?
I'll throw out a counterpoint to that. I do think we don't want to lose sight of the goal here, and the pathway to building savings and ultimately building wealth in this society is by getting linked and connected in the right way to mainstream financial services. So I do think that is a goal that we should all feel comfortable and confident to continue to work on. I do think there's going to be some opportunities and changes with the new Fed rules coming into effect on July 1st that would at least require banks to disclose, which they never had, the overdraft fees, and require that a consumer actually opt in to that product feature. We had done a survey of some of the leading financial institutions in the city last summer and found that you actually couldn't get from most of the financial institutions a checking account that didn't have overdraft protection. You couldn't say, by the way, I want to opt out of that overdraft protection fee issue. I don't want that. You actually couldn't get get an account without that linked. So
Wow.
I do think that's going to change the game a bit. And I think it just then shifts our sort of broader public messaging into a don't opt in strategy and encouraging people to do what they're currently maybe doing with their prepaid debits, which is, make sure you keep that limit so that you're not going below a zero balance and that you aren't inadvertently overdrawing your account and then getting hit with these exorbitant fees.
Fair enough. We have time for probably just one more, I think, unless they're both two if they're both short.
Sorry, I don't think mine is short. I'm Andrea. I'm a Columbia Business School student. And I'm actually wondering about the role that business school plays in all of this. I'm actually starting an initiative to try to get financial education as an issue brought up in business schools. I think that when we're talking about the revenue model for banks, a lot of times we're talking about the way that financial education is taught to bankers. So how do we get that awareness out there? And and we'd love all of you guys to come talk at Columbia Business School if you're able, to let them know about some of these issues so that they can be informed when they go into their banking positions and do the work that they do.
That's not too long.
Well, I think especially when we're dealing with the unbanked and underbanked, we need to find out how they want information delivered and see what ways banks can serve as kind of a partner for helping them build savings and wealth and moving along that asset building curve rather than kind of stacking the deck against them in terms of gotcha fees. And some banks are doing this, for example, in the form of giving people cell phone text alerts when their account reaches a certain lower level that they themselves define. So for some of us, it might be, I want to make sure I have a $25 cushion, and if I go below that, I want a text message from my bank. For other people, it might be $100, just depending on the person. But there's a lot of innovative ways that banks could communicate with people and give them timely, real-time financial education that can help them make the right decision instead of kind of trying to set them up for failure, which I think is the business model of a lot of banks right now with regard to fees.
Okay, interesting. So we have structural problems, but there also seems to be real communication problems that can be addressed. We have time for one more. I think someone has the right to it. Sorry.
What about the commission?
Hi, my name's Sarah Ludwig. I also work at NEDAP. Hi, Dean. I'm over here.
Hi.
Hi. So I just have two quick things. One is the reason people don't know about basic banking, I just have to put the historical record out there, is that when the law was passed in New York State, banks fought very hard not to have to market it. So there's actually that's part of the law, is they have to offer it, but they don't have to tell anyone that it exists. Unless they're marketing, it's complicated. There's an exception to that too, of course. But just so people understand that. The second thing is just also as a counterpoint to Ed, I hadn't had much coffee this morning, but it turns out I don't need it, so thank you. Just as a kind of counterpoint, there's thinking about kind of, well, why not just kind of have everybody in a second tier of predatory, fringe, financial, unregulated, dangerous
That's what he said.
asset
Yes, exactly.
sapping services, because what the hell? There's sort of at the other side of the table a beginning of conversation about thinking about financial services delivery through a kind of utilities model, a public utilities model, where we take it out of the kind of private sectoral sphere. We're talking about people's basic needs. We're talking about people's sustenance. We're talking about people's livelihoods. And clearly all the questions that we're talking about today really fit within a much broader economic justice context about people's ability to make enough money to live in a quality way. So I think we need to start to kind of turn the dial and think very differently about these questions fundamentally, which is if we are trying to meet people's basic economic needs, and the only way we can do that is through a construct of thinking about profits and sort of putting the bank's profitability rights before people's economic rights, we've got a really big problem. So that wasn't quick, but just as we're thinking about it, we should think about
it wasn't
public,
a question, but a good thought.
but about public delivery systems, just as the other side of Ed's point.
Thank you for that. I guess the commissioner has a question, and he gets to ask it. Get you a microphone. Just it's on its way.
Thanks so much. This has been a fascinating conversation. I think that there are all sorts of ways to approach the problem, all sorts of ways to approach the solution. There are issues of messaging that we've talked about. There are issues of regulation that are important. But I also want to add a little bit of nuance to the question of marketing, to the market-based approach. Part of what I think is so exciting about the Safe Start account is that it was a way to leverage a market opportunity through voluntary partnership, not by waiting for Washington to insist upon the creation of these products. And I do want to underscore, and this is what I get paid for, New York City, as of today, has something that no other city has in this country, which is an account that cannot be overdrawn, that anyone in the city can have. And so I don't want us to lose sight of all of these larger questions and challenges, which are very, very real, but particularly for those of you that are literally working with these populations or thinking about ways to find solutions, the local solution that we've announced today is the beginning of a real revolution, which is partnership with the banking industry that turns the tables and doesn't go hat in hand and say, gee, we don't like this, or gee, would you market it, or gee, could you help us fund something? It says, this city is about to have an account that's going to be widely marketed using a mayor's platform, and you're in or you're out, and you're only in if it's safe. And so I think things are going to change in a significant way here in New York, because now everybody can have a completely overdraft-free opportunity to be in mainstream banking and get every dollar that they're earning.
How about that? So hopeful note, we'll leave it there. Thank you. Thanks to the panel. Thanks to the New School, the Center for New York City Affairs.